Greetings and salutations. This is another delightful video from me to you. This time it is the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook. It is called the Core Rulebook because this book is not just a player's handbook, but also a setting lore book and game mastery guide all in one. Basic game mastery guide. People complain about the fact that it's 600 pages. I do agree to a point that having a core rulebook where it contains also the Game Master stuff, lore section for Galarian and such and such, that this makes the book quite a bit thicker. And if you take that stuff out of the book, the Game Master section and the lore section, you could actually get it down to a somewhat more decent section, and you can actually put another book in there, like the Ancestry Guide or something else, another book for more player options. This is one of those situations where I wish Paizo made just simply a player's handbook with just the player's handbook options, cleaned up and more organized so the players have easier time of going through it, as opposed to having to lug around almost the entire core game in one book. But there you go. Paizo or Piazzo, you hear all three pronunciations periodically from different people, really likes to put a lot of really nice quality artwork in their books. And we go into the introduction section right up in the front here. This is actually well written overall, and it is very it's not wastefully wordy, yet at the same time, it is also not lacking in wording. It's probably on the heavier side. There's a lot of words describing a lot of concepts in the system, almost presuming that a person has absolutely no concept of what a TTRPG is. And it gives you an example of play, the action system, and basic concepts of character creation. It walks you through all the steps, step by step. It gets you into the ancestry and class section right here, and backgrounds, the ABCs, and D and E. There's A, B, C, D, E. Ancestries, backgrounds, classes, equipment, and details. It gives you the anatomy of the game player's sheet. By the way, the sheet makes it look more complex than it actually is, because the sheet actually maps out all the math of putting everything together. Where in the case of Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition sheets, it does not do that. It does not map out all the math on the sheets. If you made a Dungeons & Dragons sheet, player character sheet, that actually outlines all the math, the steps in creating the totals when you roll a dice, it would look something like this. It's just one of those things that predispositions people to mild panic attacks, because you put extra information on the... In the case of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition sheet, it is just the basics. It doesn't have the math, as I said before, on it. Where the Paizo sheet does have the math and the process on it, and the spot for a lot of the different things. So, yeah. But yes, there it is. We go through that. As I said, goes through all the steps. And you get into the little section on finishing details, which is the D part. You got alignment in there, how to level up your character, everything else. And then you get explanation of your ancestries and your heritages. And you have basically a handful here: dwarf, elf, halfling, human, gnome, goblin. Goblin is awesome, by the way. All this simple information. For the most part, it walks you through pretty well this whole process here. This whole front end of the book is well written. It is fairly easy to get through this section here. The reason why I keep saying that is because it does not after a while. It gets a little more complicated. It goes into classes, such as alchemist, bard, barbarian, cleric, champion, so forth. Yet again, there's examples of some basic builds for each class, or sort of like your subclasses if you want to build a subclass. You got a nice full page artwork of the iconic Amiri for barbarians. There is, as I said before, a lot of artwork spread throughout the book. So far, as I said, the book is very well put together. You can pretty much go through all the class section. There's no problem here. All the concepts are pretty well written out. Every so often, if you buy an older version of this book, there are like numerous little defects. The original version of this book, the first and second printing of this book contained a lot of errors in them. For say like not a lot of errors, but it contained a notable number of errors, like remnants from the playtest for alchemist and other little bits and pieces like that. When they were missing the clan decker for the dwarf and a few other things like that. So if you go to the Paizo website, there's a section on the Paizo website containing the erratas for the book. However, if you were to go and order this book directly from Paizo on their website, you'll get the newest version of it. It's as of this as of this video, they are roughly around the fourth revision of the book. So they've cleaned up a lot of the little errors here and there that are mixed through the book. Remnants from the playtest and so forth. And there you go. Now the hard thing is, once you get past all the classes and you get into, after the skills, there's a section on skills. You go through the classes. You got the archetypes. This is basically the multi-classing system that Pathfinder 2nd Edition uses. You get into the skill section. The skill section works out fairly well overall. But as you get past the skill section, there's a lot of stuff here to learn, but it's all very well organized. The problem happens when you get to around the feats of the book. The feats section, equipment, and beyond, where it will reference a few things that are not covered in this book. Such as like silver. Some weapons you can have a trait called silvered weapons, and it will give you a basic information attached to it, but will not explain silvered weapons in depth, or cold iron, or things like that, and some of the granular Game Master things. And it still does not entirely cover that to the full detail in the Game Master section in the back. You actually have to get the Bestiary guide. You have to get one of the bestiaries, or the actual Game Master book for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the standalone book, to actually cover some of the details in finer detail. That is an annoying thing because it references like cold iron. It references something about resistance and weakness with cold iron, and it doesn't explain the resistance or weakness with cold iron. It just says it triggers a weakness in enemies, and basically that's it. And it leaves questions for the player, and it just happens every so often, but it's not absolutely terrible. That's just information that is for the Game Master, not the player. It just happens to mention it in the book, and it brings up concern. And as I said, that's usually right around the point when you get to the equipment section. you get to the feats, equipment, and spells, where it mentions a few concepts. Even in the skill section, it will mention a few things, and it just will generate questions. The answers for those questions are in the bestiaries and the Game Master Guide, not the one in this book, the actual standalone book. So, and if you're a player that are worrying about something like that, don't worry about it. The Game Master, if they have the Game Master Guide or in the bestiary, they'll have the answer to that. It's just one of those things that kind of throws you off. There is quite a few layers to a lot of this stuff. This is, by the way, talking about the weapons and the armor. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, there is just this really simple progression of armor and weapons. There is just simply between one weapon and another. One weapon is way better than another, and there is, once you get enough money to get the better weapon, you just get that better weapon, or you get your full plate or something like that, and you just ignore the fact that there's really no reason to have the cheaper one. In Pathfinder 2nd edition, there's traits tied to each thing that grant options with your weapons. And you got Dilly D8, and you got Trip, and you got Reach, and you got Versatile P. Versatile P is Versatile Piercing. So if you have a slashing weapon, you also have a piercing option with it. So if you need to do piercing damage, but the enemy's strong against slashing, you can always use the Versatile feature to use piercing, and so forth. You got tags, like if you are looking at your various different weapons, you got groups called Club, Sword, Polearm, Pick. There's traits that are tied to those categories that activate other abilities in spells or feats and such. It's with Pathfinder 2nd edition, so that's pretty cool. You got more variety of options with your armor and your shields and your weapons. So in Pathfinder 2nd edition, it's not just what is a better version of something else. There is literally I could buy that heavier suit of armor, but then I get a penalty. I cannot get the full dexterity bonus or as much dexterity bonus as I had before, and I also lose movement because it's a heavier armor. I lose 5 movement off my movement wearing that armor, just by default. I can have better AC with my shield. Besides just simply having a magical shield that has a bonus on top of your regular AC bonus, you also have different size shields that have different bonuses tied to them and different durabilities. You have broader range. Also, when I was paging through this and I was doing my research for my other project, my special project, I realized when I was looking at the Player's Handbook for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and other TTRPGs that Pathfinder 2nd edition equipment is a lot cheaper overall in comparison to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition or other TTRPGs. And I kind of just remembered, oh yeah, Paizo really wants your characters to really make a use of the items, so they lowered the price on them. So you have less of an issue of buying caltrops. You can buy bags of caltrops and use them because they designed the system to encourage you to use items more. Use your alchemist fire, use your thunderstones, use your tanglefoot bag more, use your healing potions, your tonics, elixirs, etc., 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 talismans, runes, so forth. Where Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is you basically buy the thing and you have that thing now. That's just a unlock. And then the stuff that you do buy that is expendable, you don't want to use it willy-nilly. You want to hold on to it with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Pathfinder 2nd edition is no, we lower the prices so you actually go and use your healing potions and you use your mutagens and you use your other stuff more regularly because we balance the system to encourage you to actually use those things. So Yeah. Oh, by the way, in this section right here, there is class kits of simple stuff that you can use on your characters. As I said before, once you get to the skills, feats, equipment, and beyond in this book, you end up with like this occasional weird thing where Paizo didn't organize as well as they did in the earlier parts of the book. This class kit section right here would have been absolutely fine to include in the character creation section. So when people are creating characters, they could see the class kit option, and you can either take this class kit or you roll for gold, or you take the standard amount of gold for your class. Where instead they take that thing and they threw it back here in this section here. So you end up having to go back into the equipment section. You're paging through, looking through things, and all of a sudden you run into the class equipment page. And like, oh, well, I don't have to go and spend all that money on all that stuff. I can just take one of these kits. It's one of those minor weird problems with the core rulebook for Pathfinder 2nd edition, is that sometimes things that should be in an earlier section, or at least noted more clearly in an earlier section, are not noted in that earlier section, so people don't realize it's an option until they've already started digging through the huge book. And it's a huge book, by the way. It takes you a while to dig through it. Even playing a few games here and there and running a few games, you start paging through the core rulebook and you discover new things all the time, constantly. Which, weirdly enough, still happens with people from the past few years with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. But that's just because the D&D 5e community is kind of just play it loose and quick, and kind of thing, and it's its own thing, which is weird because people like, this is rulings not rules oriented system, the 5e community, and this is really funny. This is actually a fairly rules heavy system, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. It's only rules light when you can consider it against say like Traveler or Pathfinder 2nd edition. If you look at older editions of Dungeons & Dragons, like the Advanced and Basic, this is a big, thick, chonking book that's bloated with rules. Where Dungeons & Dragons Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition, and Basic Dungeons & Dragons are actually very rules light. It's just that Gary Gygax likes to over-explain shit. That's about it. If you simplify down Gary Gygax's explanations in Dungeons & Dragons Advanced Dungeons & Dragons to basically just basic logic, the book would be basically half the size. It would literally be half the size if you just simplified everything down without having to go into the deeper philosophical components of it. But anyways, what I really do like here is that there's a lot of granularity and explanation and concepts for Pathfinder 2nd edition. I also found when there's really weird quirks that occur here and there, like when it comes to animals, like riding animals and such like that, you'll ever so often get a thing like the animal section where D&D 5th edition actually has more depth in options. This does have Pathfinder 2nd edition has rental option here for renting a animal like a pony or a horse or something else like that. But D&D 5th edition actually has a few more options that are a little bit deeper. There's a few other things that are a little bit deeper in the Pathfinder 2nd edition, but it's just one of those weird things, you know. You go into the chapter section on spells, As I said before, this is actually very well organized overall, the vast majority of the time. It makes sense when you're reading through it. But every so often, as I said before, you'll come across something that references resistance, weakness, or immunity. And it doesn't define it. And you end up wondering why. And the answer is that's in other books, and that's a Game Master information thing. You have the Arcane spell list. The rules for the spells are actually quite nice overall. It's not overly bloated, but it's pretty to the point. You have a nice selection. You got tags on the top of all the spells that define various characteristics. And you keep going. And as I said before, I got like note tabs in here because I'm doing a lot of research for my campaign, my Pathfinder 2nd Edition campaign, and my other gaming system that I'm working on, and so forth. And then you go into domains. There's focus spells in this system. And then you go into a section called Playing the Game. That explains checks and so forth. And this is still all useful information for the players. Interestingly enough, this section right here is commonly covered in like the magic section in like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is in the playing the game section in Pathfinder 2nd edition. As I said before, the organization in the Pathfinder 2nd edition book starts out absolutely solid. And then as you go from the front to back of the book, you end up with like situations where something you would think should be in a section is not in that section, it's in another section. Or it references things that are in other books that are coming out or are out currently that that draw questions to players like immunity and resistance. But anyways, it still does a solid job of overall explaining it. And right around page, you got the hero point system, you got actions in combat, and so forth. But once you get around, say, page 483, you go into the Game Master lore section, and you have magic items in the back and all kinds of fun stuff. And more deeper pricing system in the back for treasure and items and alchemy. So as I said before, this is both a basic Game Master book, player handbook, and lore book in here. And I actually skipped past the lore section. This, other than the weird little, they should put this thing in another section of the book, or it references things, but then it doesn't actually explain a few things because that's stuff for the Game Master. This book is actually pretty darn solid. It is usually sold far less than what the price is marked on the book, $59.99. You get all the rules in this book on the websites that I listed earlier, as well as character building app. But you get none of the lore or lore explanation why some things are the way they are. In the older versions of this book, I have to remind you yet again that there are various errors, like particularly with the alchemist, and a few things that were forgotten that in later revisions of this book they added back in or fixed. So if you have like the first printing of this book, that book is probably a 3.25 star, because the majority of the information in that book is still useful, but you have to go to the Paizo website to look up the erratas. If you get like the newest version, like the fourth printing, which is 2023 out, sometime in March is the 4th printing. You have the most up-to-date version. They fixed a lot of the little errors with the alchemist and stuff like that, and they cleared up a few things. So, and that should probably be better than the 3.25 star rating I gave it. That probably might be a 4-star. They have an index in the back of the book. They got a conditions section, but in the very back of the book, they got a whole section on appendixes. But they have an index glossary section. This is semi-useful, but the sheer amount of information that's in this book, the index glossary section of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition book feels like it's half the size it should be. It literally feels like it's half the size it should be. And it doesn't quite entirely cover all the instances in which that feature that it references in the index glossary section references it. It only references the biggest pieces of information related to that information. So it might reference something like resistance, and will list only like 3 or 4 pages of that, when it's actually like 10 pages it's referenced in where resistance comes up in this book. So, but it only gives you like the biggest pieces of information where you can find it in the book, and some basic overflow of the concept. So the glossary and index is underdeveloped in this book. It feels like it was something that was written last after they got it all written out, and they forgot to include page numbers for some references, and forgot to fill in a few pieces of information here and there with the glossary and index. But that's about it. As you probably saw before, there's the OGL, there's an ad page in the back here for the Lost Omen books and the bestiary. By the way, in the front of the bestiary, there is the core information for adjusting monsters and the information on resistances, immunities, and weaknesses for monsters and players. That's where you would find that information. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have a delightful day, a nice night, a wonderful week, and a magnificent month. And it's late at night, and I'm starting to get dense because I've been sitting so long. I need a standing desk. Thank you very much. See you next time.